Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a concept that's really fundamental to understanding human behavior. I mean, its roots stretch way back to ancient times. We're diving into approach and avoidance motivation.
Yeah.
And our guide for this is a really fascinating academic article from the Educational Psychology Review. It's simply titled Approach and Avoidance Motivation.
Exactly. And, this deep dive is really all about understanding why this seemingly simple idea, this difference between moving towards something we want and, away from something we don't, why it's considered such a cornerstone of psychology.
Right.
You'll see how this core principle just kind of pops up in various ways across different schools of thought and even in how all sorts of creatures behave.
So think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding a really essential piece of the psychological puzzle. Our goal today is basically to pull out the most important insights about approach and avoidance motivation from this research.
Right.
Give you a solid grasp of a concept that's, well, pretty key to understanding why we all do what we do. Okay, so let's unpack this. And to really get the significance, we need to go way back.
Indeed. Yeah, the idea isn't new at all. Our source traces it right back to ancient Greek philosophers, Democritus and Aristippus.
Okay.
They were proponents of what's called ethical hedonism, which, at its heart, suggests that seeking pleasure and avoiding pain is like the ultimate driving force behind our actions.
Wow.
So even way back then, this fundamental push-pull was seen as central.
So this idea of being drawn to good things and, repelled by bad things has been around for millennia. Fast forward a good bit. 18th century, Jeremy Bentham. This is where it gets really interesting because he took that early idea a step further. Psychological hedonism, he called it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is Bentham wasn't just saying we should seek pleasure and avoid pain like a moral guideline.
Right.
He was arguing this is actually how humans do behave.
Oh.
He famously said that nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure, essentially saying these two forces are the ultimate drivers. Pretty powerful claim,
Yeah.
about the very nature of motivation.
It really is. And what's remarkable is how many major figures in psychology, like across different eras and perspectives, then took this very distinction and put it into their own theories.
Exactly.
But this foundational idea just kept resurfacing, but in different forms.
Precisely. Consider William James, often called the father of American psychology. He talked about pleasure as tremendous reinforcer, something that makes us want to repeat behavior, and
Right.
pain as a tremendous inhibitor, something that makes us stop. That's a very direct link to the approach avoidance idea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you see how this core idea, this simple push and pull, wasn't just a fleeting thought. Thinkers kept circling back to it.
And then you've got Freud. Can't really talk psychology without mentioning him.
He saw this hedonistic tendency, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, as the motivational bedrock of his whole psychodynamic theory.
Yeah, it's like he recognized, kind of at a gut level, that our desire for pleasure and fear of pain is just a non-negotiable starting point for understanding why we do anything, even unconsciously.
Totally.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see just how deeply ingrained this concept is. Even Carl Jung, with his focus on introverts and extroverts, he framed their differences in terms of movement.
How so?
Well, extroverts are energized by moving towards social interaction, while introverts draw back, move away.
Right. And it wasn't just the big theorists focusing on the mind's complexities. Even in studying basic reflexes, like Ivan Pavlov's work, you see this principle. He distinguished between the orienting response, turning towards a new stimulus,
Okay.
and the defensive response, moving away from something potentially harmful. This brings up an important point about just how fundamental this really is. You see it not just in grand theories, but in the basic ways organisms interact with their environment.
Right.
Edward Thorndike's law of effect. The idea that behaviors followed by satisfaction get repeated, and those followed by discomfort. Well, they don't. That's another clear example in learning.
Absolutely. And Skinner, building on that, talked about reinforcers, things we approach increasing behavior, while punishers, things we avoid decrease it.
Mm-hmm.
Even in more cognitive approaches, like Edward Tolman's work on purposive behaviorism, he stressed that behavior is ultimately directed toward or away from a goal.
And Kurt Lewin's field theory, with positive valences attracting us and negative valences repelling us.
Same idea.
It's the same core idea, just different terms. Then you have Neil Miller, who specifically looked at the conflicts when we're both attracted and repelled by the same thing.
That internal struggle.
That push-pull right there for a
Yeah.
single goal.
It's fascinating how these different thinkers, with their own unique takes, all kept coming back to this. Even Clark Hall focused on physiological drives, differentiated between conditioned appetitive drives like hunger, thirst, things we approach,
Right.
and conditioned aversive drives linked to shock or noise, things we instinctively avoid.
And the list just goes on. Henry Murray talked about adient needs moving us towards things and abient needs making us recoil away.
Adient and abient. Interesting terms.
Yeah. And Julian Rotter's social learning theory emphasized how our past experiences with rewards and punishments shape our expectations, influencing what we choose to approach and avoid later on.
And even Maslow's hierarchy, right? The
Yeah.
basic deficit needs are about reducing negative states, avoiding discomfort,
Mm-hmm. Avoiding deprivation.
while the higher growth needs are about increasing positive stuff,
Uh,
actively approaching something desirable, like fulfillment.
Exactly. And then you've got biologically oriented theories like Hans Weissent's work. He proposed introverts are stimulus shy. They tend to avoid high stimulation. While extroverts are stimulus hungry, they actively seek it out. Again, framed around approach and avoidance tendencies.
It's like this principle keeps showing up everywhere in psychology, even Bowlby's attachment theory. Secure attachment fosters exploration approach behavior
Yeah.
versus insecure attachment, leading to more cautious, avoidant behavior.
And even in cognitive psych, which sometimes seems kind of removed from basic drives,
Yeah.
you see echoes for Tider's ideas about can implying possible success if we try, approaching positive, and may implying no punishment if we try, avoiding negative.
Subtly connected.
It's all subtly connected to this underlying framework. So it's almost like every major thinker in their own way was grappling with this fundamental tension. What draws us in, what pushes us away?
He really paints a picture of just how deeply ingrained this distinction is. But it's not just a human thing, is it? Does this apply more broadly, like in the animal kingdom?
Oh, absolutely not just human. This is a second key argument for its fundamentality. Its applicability across, well, pretty much all life forms. Our source points out that even a single-celled amoeba shows basic approach and avoidance.
An amoeba. Seriously?
Yeah. Weak light, it tends to move towards it. Intense light, it withdraws. Doesn't get much more basic than that.
Wow, that is fundamental.
Indeed. T.C. Schnerle, a key figure in comparative psychology, even proposed that all organisms, regardless of complexity, have what he called A-type mechanisms for approach,
Okay.
like getting food, mating, and W-type mechanisms for withdrawal, like defense, protection from harm.
A-type and W-type.
Right. Now, obviously, these get way more sophisticated in complex organisms, but the underlying principle move towards good away from bad stays constant.
And it's not just a general thing across species, right? There's even variation within species.
Precisely. Research consistently shows these interspecies differences in approach avoidance tendencies in a huge variety of animals: monkeys, cats, dogs, wolves, cows, goats, rats, mice, birds, snakes, fish, even crustaceans. You'll find some individuals are consistently more prone to approach new things, explore, while others are more cautious, avoid the unfamiliar.
That sounds a lot like animal personality. You know, the
Right.
bold ones and the shy ones.
Exactly. And that's precisely what some researchers have looked into. Factor analytic studies, these are statistical techniques to find underlying dimensions, have suggested basic approach and fear avoidance dimensions in animal personality.
Interesting.
Our source highlights a study on guppies, actually, where they found these two main factors, one for exploration and social attraction approach, and the other for responses to aversive stuff, avoidance.
Guppies have personalities.
Apparently. And what's really interesting is these dimensions were pretty stable over time within individual guppies. So, yeah, you can have a consistently bold guppy and a consistently shy one.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So these consistent behavioral styles based on this fundamental tendency.
Yeah. Exactly. And similar findings, independent approach and avoidance dimensions, have been found in studies of octopuses, marmots, bush babies, rhesus monkeys, even rats. It just underscores how fundamental these tendencies are, playing a crucial role in how animals navigate their world.
It really makes you think about the evolutionary roots. Why is this distinction so common?
That's the crucial point. Evolutionary theorists like Tooby and Cosmides argue that the decision to approach or withdraw has been the fundamental adaptive decision throughout evolutionary history.
Makes sense for survival.
Totally. Think about it. Moving towards food and mates increases survival and reproduction chances. Moving away from predators and dangers helps you avoid getting harmed. It's survival 101.
It's the most basic cost-benefit analysis, just hardwired into biology.
Precisely. As Schnerle himself put it, the evolutionary path is basically littered with species that failed to figure out what was good and what was bad in their environment. Those with more effective approach and avoidance mechanisms were just more likely to survive, reproduce, pass on those traits.
So it's not just historically important in our thinking, but biologically essential across the board. And speaking of basic reactions, our source also talks about the immediacy, the automaticity of these responses.
Right. This is the third compelling argument for its fundamentality. Think back to that amoeba in the light.
Yeah, instantaneous.
Practically instantaneous, reflex. It highlights that the speed of these approach avoidance decisions can be absolutely crucial.
It's not just what you decide, but that your system is primed to react fast to opportunities and threats.
Exactly. Zajonc, a prominent psychologist, even asserted that approach avoidance discriminations are likely the primary, most elemental reaction, the foundation for all subsequent, more complex responses.
That's a pretty strong claim.
It is, but it aligns with that rapid, gut-level reaction idea.
Okay.
And there's evidence even in us complex humans. Think about our unconditioned reflexes. We have orienting reflexes, like turning your head towards a sound, kind of approach-oriented, gathering info. And then defensive reflexes, like pulling away from pain or the startle response, clearly avoidance, designed to protect us.
That sudden flinch you can't control.
Exactly. And the blink part of the startle reflex is interesting. It happens incredibly fast, milliseconds after a loud noise or bright flash. Protects the eye, interrupts processing to deal with the potential threat.
Right.
And what's fascinating is this reflex isn't static. It's modulated by our prior emotional state. It's stronger and faster if we're already feeling anxious or negative.
Huh. So our baseline mood affects how strongly we react to danger.
Precisely. Our inherent tendency to avoid threats gets amplified when we're already feeling vulnerable.
Sure.
And it goes beyond just reflexes. Research consistently shows we automatically evaluate pretty much everything we encounter on a basic good-bad dimension.
Automatically?
Yeah, incredibly quickly, often unintentionally, even without conscious awareness. It's like our brains are constantly tagging things, approach or avoid.
Like a gut reaction, but happening even before we know what we're reacting to.
Potentially even faster. There's this thing called the automatic evaluation effect. Studies show that subliminally flashed positive or negative words can affect how quickly we then pronounce other positive or negative words.
Whoa.
It demonstrates our brains are constantly making these value judgments, even below conscious awareness.
That's pretty incredible.
Okay.
So before our conscious mind fully processes something, our brain's already made a basic call. Good or bad, safe or dangerous.
And some theories even suggest this initial evaluation might happen relatively independently of our slower, more typical cognitive processing, like a more direct, immediate pathway. Neurophysiological evidence supports this, suggesting the circuitry for that initial good-bad evaluation might be partly separate from the circuitry for just identifying what the stimulus is.
So good and bad might get processed on a more primal, rapid pathway.
Exactly. Perhaps a more emotionally driven level.
Okay.
And this automatic evaluation then evokes initial predispositions to either approach or withdraw. Makes intuitive sense, right? Something tagged good, we lean towards it. Tagged bad, we instinctively want to back off.
Yeah.
This link between evaluation and action tendency has been proposed by theorists for years across emotion, motivation, attitude research.
And there's experimental evidence too, right? Those reaction time studies.
Yes. Classic experiments found people were faster doing an approach action like pulling a lever towards themselves when shown positive words or images.
Huh.
Conversely, faster doing an avoidance action, pushing a lever away when shown negative stimuli. And this happened even when they weren't explicitly told to evaluate the stimuli. Suggests a deeply ingrained automatic link between evaluation and motor response. Our initial reaction to good is literally to move closer, to bad is to move away.
Seems like such a fundamental predisposition. But obviously we don't always act on those initial impulses, especially as humans.
Exactly. That's crucial. Especially in humans with our capacity for self-regulation, that initial tendency isn't always translated into overt behavior.
Right. The internal negotiation.
Precisely. Like you might feel drawn to that delicious but unhealthy cake approach, but your goal of eating healthy overrides it, avoidance.
Yep, happens all the time.
Or you might have an urge to avoid a difficult conversation, avoidance, but your long-term goals make you confront it, approach, despite the initial inclination.
Hmm.
This highlights that there are likely multiple levels of approach and avoidance motivation operating, sometimes conflicting, maybe organized hierarchically. Conscious goals can override automatic tendencies.
So basic settings, but then more complex systems can adjust our course. This is really fascinating. But what about the physical stuff? Is there actual evidence in the brain for separate systems underlying approach and avoidance?
Ah, yes. This is the fourth key pillar, neurophysiological evidence. Over the past few decades, theorists have proposed neuroanatomically based models suggesting distinct neural circuits and regions are involved.
Like actual go and no-go circuit.
In a simplified sense, yeah. Early groundbreaking research using direct electrical stimulation showed stimulating certain areas was powerfully reinforcing pleasure, wanting more,
Okay.
while stimulating other areas was intensely punishing, aversive immediate avoidance. The septal area was famously dubbed a pleasure center, while parts of the hypothalamus were linked to pain and aversion.
Like finding the physical on-off switches for pleasure and pain.
Exactly. And subsequent research using more sophisticated techniques like brain imaging has refined this. Recent data strongly suggests approach motivation is closely tied to dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, a key part of the brain's reward circuit.
Dopamine, the motivation molecule.
Kinda, yeah, signaling go get more of that. Conversely, avoidance motivation seems linked more to activity in the amygdala, the brain's hub for fear and threat detection,
Okay.
and possibly involves acetylcholine in the nucleus accumbens too, but differently. So different neurochemicals and regions seem preferentially involved in driving us towards desires and away from fears.
So different brain parts, different chemical messengers for these two drives.
Precisely. And it's not just those deeper, more primitive regions. Richard Davidson's work on neocortical asymmetry is significant here.
What's that?
It suggests the left and right cerebral hemispheres play different roles. His research shows people with greater electrical activity in the left prefrontal cortex at rest tend to experience more approach-related positive emotions,
Okay.
while those with greater activity in the right prefrontal cortex tend to experience more withdrawal-related negative emotions.
And this isn't just temporary, it's more like a trait.
Exactly. This pattern is relatively stable over time, even seen in infants as young as 10 months old. Suggests a biological predisposition.
Wow.
And they've documented the same pattern during actual emotional experiences too, lending more support for a neural basis for these orientations.
That's pretty compelling evidence for a biological underpinning.
It is, although our source does mention a methodological issue with some earlier EEG asymmetry research. It might have oversimplified things by treating activation as a single bipolar continuum rather than potentially independent systems.
Ah, okay. Important nuance.
Yeah, it's a reminder that our understanding is still evolving, need to be cautious interpreting data.
Absolutely. Complex puzzle. But even without getting lost in the neurobiology, the basic idea of approach and avoidance it feels right, doesn't it? Resonates with everyday experience.
That brings us to the fifth argument, the intuitive appeal. For most people, the idea we're motivated by things we want to gain and things we want to avoid just makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, it's common sense, really.
Exactly. It aligns with our subjective experience. And while intuition isn't the final judge, our source argues it's an important independent source of info, often the starting point.
Right.
And while science can overrule intuition, in this case, the wealth of empirical research actually strongly supports this intuitive understanding.
So it's not just a feeling, it's a feeling backed by evidence from lots of different angles.
Precisely. From ancient philosophy to modern neuroscience, across the animal kingdom to basic reflexes, this distinction keeps proving relevant. It's actually surprising, then, that our source points out how this seemingly obvious idea can sometimes get overshadowed in contemporary motivation research.
How so?
While the focus often shifts to more specific, nuanced constructs, and this fundamental principle gets a bit lost.
Like focusing on the trees and losing sight of the forest?
Kind of, yeah. Some intro-psych textbooks mention this hedonistic principle as a basic assumption, but then it gets left behind when researchers dive into specifics. So the mission of our deep dive today, highlighting this fundamental distinction, is actually quite important, even for the field itself, reminding us of the foundations.
So the authors are basically arguing this isn't just history, it's integral to understanding motivation now and needs a more central role. Not the only piece, but foundational. Okay, so we've laid out why this is so important. But the article also touches on different labels used over time. Let's get into those terminological considerations.
Right. While approach avoidance motivation is the main term here, others have been used for similar concepts. One of the earliest is hedonism.
We mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. Historically, it often meant immediate bodily sensations and affect physical pleasure, physical pain. A more basic take, maybe.
More primal, instinctual.
Precisely, though more recently, some have tried to broaden hedonism to include things like aesthetic or accomplishment-based pleasures and pains. Under that broader definition, it becomes very similar to the approach avoidance idea we're discussing.
So the narrow historical definition is like a subset.
Yeah.
What about approach withdrawal motivation? Sounds almost identical.
It does. It came from T.C. Schnerle, the comparative psychologist we mentioned.
Right. A-type and W-type.
His work emphasized observable physical movement, move closer, approach, move away, withdrawal, very behaviorally focused.
So all about the outward action.
Exactly, which is useful for studying basic motivation in simpler organisms, but limited for complex behaviors, especially in humans.
Why limited?
Well, you can be strongly motivated for a long-term goal, like a promotion approach, but your daily behavior might be sitting at a computer. No direct movement towards or away right then, but the motivation is strong.
Our internal drives don't always map perfectly onto immediate movements.
Precisely. Schnerle's framework is great for basic reactive motivation, less so for advanced, proactive, cognitively mediated human motivation.
Okay, and then appetitive aversive motivation. Sounds more biological.
It does, and it also has a long history. W. Craig introduced it early 20th century. Like approach avoidance, it's rooted in motivational valence, positive, desirable, appetitive versus negative, undesirable, aversive.
Appetitive like appetite, a desire for something. Aversive like revulsion, wanting to avoid.
Exactly. Craig saw appetites and aversions as internal states of agitation driving organisms to seek positive and avoid negative.
Yeah.
Tolman also used this distinction. And contemporary use aligns well with this, often with more detail on the underlying physiological mechanisms. We can now map some appetitive reversive drives onto brain circuits and neurochemicals.
So are approach avoidance and appetitive aversive basically interchangeable now?
That's what our source concludes. They're used very similarly in the literature, essentially synonymous. Both frameworks work across levels of complexity, from amoebas to humans.
And the authors here just chose approach avoidance for clarity.
Pretty much, yeah, for clarity and consistency in their discussion.
Got it. So different terms, slight nuances, but the core idea moving towards good, away from bad, is central and consistent.
Precisely. And as we wrap up, it's worth just quickly summarizing those key arguments for why this distinction is so fundamental.
Yeah, let's recap.
We've got its long history back to ancient Greece, its applicability across basically all life, the immediacy and automaticity of the responses, the growing neurophysiological evidence for distinct systems.
And finally, that intuitive appeal. It just makes sense.
Exactly. It resonates with our common sense understanding.
It's like this simple dichotomy is just woven into the fabric of how we and so many other creatures navigate the world.
Totally. And while it's definitely not the only factor in motivation, lots of other drives and goals matter, it
Right.
serves as a crucial foundation, the bedrock upon which much of our behavior is built.
So here's maybe a final thought for everyone listening to really consider. Think about the balance of your own inherent approach and avoidance tendencies. In your daily life, your long-term goals, are you more often driven by potential positive outcomes of the carrot? Or more by avoiding negative consequences of the stick?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more importantly, how might understanding this fundamental aspect of your own motivation consciously influence the choices you make going forward? Something to chew on.
Definitely.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.